Coming up on this episode of Pause, we'll be joined by Sarah Patton from the Warrensburg Animal Shelter and talking about what you can do when you need help with your animal. That's coming up next on Pause. And welcome to Pause. I'm your host, Dr. Phil Hoffman, and joining us this evening is Sarah Patton. Sarah works at the Warrensburg Animal Shelter. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
Let's talk a little bit about the shelter itself. Obviously, it's in Warrensburg,
yes.
But tell us a little bit about the area that you serve and the kinds of services that you provide there.
Well, our shelter serves not only the Warrensburg area, but all of Johnson County. We take in any animal that is in need of our assistance, whether it's a cat or a dog or any other fuzzy, scaly critter that might come through our doors. We do what we can to help them out. We try to relocate the animals back into their own homes, but when that's not possible, we do try to place them into new adoptive homes, and we transfer a lot of them to other rescues if we can't find them homes within the local area. We work with shelters throughout the state and throughout the country, really, to do that, to get them transferred so that they can find a new home.
And when you talk about the animals that wind up at the shelter, typically what's the story? How do they wind up coming to the shelter?
We usually get them as strays, an animal that has wandered away from their home and been picked up by a Good Samaritan or animal control and brought to the shelter. A lot of the animals that we do take in also are ones that the owners can no longer care for. And so those animals are turned over to us in hopes that we can find them a new adoptive home with a family that is able to take care of them. Some of the reasons there are usually sometimes allergies, or the individual is moving and can't take the pet with them.
And certainly it's not cheap sometimes to own an animal. I know
Correct.
From my own experience in that.
Okay.
And whenever my daughters were young and they wanted to have 2 and 3 and 4 dogs, I was like, no, I have to feed then and
Yes.
medicate and do all of those things.
Absolutely.
So it can be fairly difficult for somebody who's having a hard time financially.
Absolutely.
Even as much as they may want to keep their pet, it can be very difficult, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we try to offer programs to help people if we know that they have an animal that they are looking to give away. We offer suggestions as to other shelters and rescues that maybe handle a specific breed more than others. And we work with a whole network of shelters and groups that may have adoptive homes looking for that specific animal, so the animal doesn't have to come necessarily to the shelter in order to find a new home.
And the service area is Johnson County for the most part for your shelter.
Yes.
But obviously if folks are watching this and they are, right on the edge of the county or they're just on the other side, there are other shelters you can put them in contact with and help them, right?
Absolutely. We work with all of the local Kansas City area shelters, and if they're on one of those little borders or in an area that's maybe not covered by our shelter, we can at least direct them into the right avenue for what shelter they need to speak with, depending on the laws and the jurisdictions.
Now, on any typical day, I imagine you probably don't have a typical day, do you?
No, there is no such thing as a typical day at an animal shelter.
Okay, so on a somewhat normal day, about how many animals are at the shelter usually?
On any given day, we have approximately 200 animals at our facility.
And how many of those are cats? How many are dogs, typically?
More dogs than cats. I would average that we probably have about 75 cats at any given time and about 125 dogs. It kind of flows with the seasons as well. In the early spring, we see kitten season hit, and so we have kittens everywhere. We build extra cages to accommodate them, and then in the fall we see more of an increase in population with the dogs as the dogs are going through their heat cycles and having puppies. We see a big influx during that time.
And I have experience because I live out in the county a little bit. So occasionally, where we live is very rural, and you'll come around the corner and there will be 2 little puppies, sitting there, and what just happened? Somebody deposited them out in the field. Is that something that's pretty common? You guys see animals coming into the shelter that have been sort of abandoned like that?
Absolutely. I would say at least 60% of the animals that we see at the shelter are animals that have been abandoned by someone.
And when you bring an animal in, it would be enough to just feed it and water it and do those things, but you are doing more than that when you bring an animal in.
Correct. For any animal that comes into our shelter, within the first 24 to 48 hours of them entering the shelter, we give them their basic vaccinations so that they stay healthy during their time at the shelter, and so that all the other animals that are being housed with them can stay healthy as well. If nobody claims the animal within a given amount of time, we also then go ahead and we'll spay or neuter the animal and give it a rabies vaccination dependent on its age before we put them up for adoption in most cases. We also feed Science Diet at our shelter, which is a costly brand of food, but we have seen that with the better quality food that we have healthier animals at our shelter. We also do flea medication for the animals as needed if they come in highly infested. Any type of minor illness or ailments, we will treat all of those as well.
And I imagine that you probably have some animals that have come to you that are in pretty rough condition, right?
Absolutely. We see the sad cases a lot. Our motto is, though, that we can fix just about anything, and so we try really hard to make sure that we can fix whatever ailments or injuries that they have.
And when an animal is, I know sometimes people will find an animal that's been hurt recently, struck by a car or something like that. Is that a role that the shelter can help with, or is that something that's well beyond what you guys can deal with?
We do get a lot of animals that have been struck by a car or had some sort of significant injury to them. If they bring them to the shelter and wish for us to work with that animal, we definitely accept those animals. If they would rather we not take them for concerns that we may have to euthanize the animal, want to take it to their vet, they're absolutely welcome to do that as well. We have a vet that is on contract with us, so we can get them in to see her fairly quickly. If it is a minor injury or ailment that we can treat, we start up treatment immediately. If it's something more serious, we work with a lot of shelters and rescues again, and some of those will take in animals that do have severe medical needs, and so we try to transfer those into those kinds of facilities to get them the help that they need.
And for an animal that comes into the shelter that's in good health and doesn't have those problems usually, do you have like a time that's typical from the time they arrive to the time that they get adopted? Is there sort of a... We
do. We are actually governed by the Missouri Department of Agriculture, and they set guidelines for us as far as how long we have to hold the animal and pretty much everything that we need to do for the animal while they're in our care. Those guidelines state that if an animal comes into us as a stray, we have to hold it for 5 business days, including a Saturday. So we hold out at our shelter for 1 calendar week, and if no one has contacted us or come by looking for that animal, at that time we start the process to get them ready for adoption. Usually it's about a 2-week period from the time that they enter our shelter till the time that we have them completely ready to go on the adoption floor and work on finding a new home for them.
And I'm sure you have a variety of different sizes and shapes and everything else with the animals. So is there a particularly difficult thing that you guys have a hard time with a certain type of animal or breed or age or anything like that where you really need folks who are watching today, if they're interested in adopting an animal, where you could use some help? The 2 most difficult animals to adopt are pit bulls and black animals. Pit bulls, a lot of people have preconceived notions about the breed in itself. If a pit bull is raised right, they can be really good dogs. Black dogs and cats are both very common in shelters. A lot of people will see them and they kind of blend in, so they don't really pay a lot of attention to those types of animals. So when you've got 6 black dogs and 1 yellow dog, they're always going to be attracted more to the yellow dog than the black dogs. So we do have some trouble adopting those. We do actually have a program in place at our shelter to help those types of animals finding a new home. It's called our Paw It Forward program, and individuals who maybe don't want another pet in their home but want to help a shelter pet can donate money towards the adoption fee. That drops their adoption fees down and makes that animal possibly a little bit more attractive, vulnerable to someone who's wanting to adopt them. So. Well, it's interesting because the dog that I have now is from a shelter, and she's a black dog, and so it's funny that that never even crossed my mind when we were looking at the dogs in the shelter. She was the quietest of all the animals. So that was the reason why she stuck out for me. So when you talk about getting folks to come in there, how much traffic do you get? Are there people that that come by, sort of, I guess, I don't want to say regulars, but I mean, are there people that have come and gotten several animals from the shelter?
There are a lot of very frequent faces at the animal shelter. Sometimes they're people who are adopting multiple animals. A lot of the people that come out to our shelter are just people who want to see the animals, or they want to look for a friend who may be looking for a particular animal, and they share on our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page that we update pretty much daily with a new picture of a new pet that's looking for a new home. So even people who can't necessarily come to the shelter help us in those types of ways to get the word out about the animals that are available at our shelter.
And when you have an animal that somebody has an interest in, what's the process? How long does it take? If they come and visit you this afternoon, how soon before they can have the animal in their possession?
It depends on the animal itself. If it's an animal that we have already put up for adoption, we've had the animal spayed or neutered, vaccinated, and it's completely vetted. If they come in and fill out the application and the adoption agreement, they can walk out of the shelter with that animal within 15 minutes. If it's an animal that has not been spayed or neutered yet, they can still come in, they can do the adoption application, and then the shelter at that time holds that animal until we can get it in to see the vet, to have any medical work updated for that animal, and then they get a call at the end of that time and we say, come pick up your new dog or cat.
So when you look at the challenges that face in any animal shelter, I'm sure they're very similar. What are the biggest issues for you? What do you guys find the most challenging, and how can folks watching right now, how can they be part of that helping?
The biggest challenge is people need to be a little bit more educated about spaying and neutering and microchipping identification for their pets. An unaltered animal is more likely to roam than one that has been spayed or neutered already. So we see a lot of the animals that are coming to our shelter are animals that have not been spayed or neutered. Not only are they out running at that time, but they're also putting themselves in the potential of making more puppies or kitties that are going to come to the shelter later. Identification is another big one that we try to stress to all of our adopters and anybody visiting the shelter. If an animal comes to us with identification, either through a name tag or a microchip that's been implanted into it, we have options there to contact an owner to let them know that we have their dog and reunite it back with that owner.
And that's in a national database, right? Am I thinking right? That information?
The microchip itself is, the information is just embedded into that microchip. Once the animal has that microchip implanted into them, the owners then need to be responsible and go register that microchip with the national database so that shelters can search that and try to locate them when they have a dog.
So in theory, you go off on vacation 5 states away and your dog disappears. If you've done that part of it, then you should be able to have a good chance of getting reunited.
Absolutely, and we see that a lot. Being so close to the military base, a lot of our animals that we adopt out locally do get transferred to other states when the individual who owned them moved. And so we get calls from shelters all over the United States regularly saying they have a dog with or a cat with one of our microchips. If it has been registered into the national database, then they can look up that information and automatically find out who the owner is and where they live and make contact with them to get the pet back home.
It's a little bit more advanced than the old days of the phone number on the tag on the collar.
Absolutely.
Well, when you look at the kind of challenges that animals face, particularly animals that wind up in your care, is there something that we as human beings do typically that you see that are simple things that if we just would stop doing these things, maybe you'd have fewer people or animals in your care?
Not really. I mean, just spaying and neutering them is what's going to cause less animals in the shelter.
And you think that that's something that most people, is it financial, or they just don't want to do it, or, I mean, what are the reasons why folks don't do that?
A little bit of both. For financial reasons, spaying and neutering an animal can be very costly.
Right.
However, raising multiple litters of puppies is even more expensive than spaying and neutering. There are a lot of resources available nowadays. The shelter even has information for low-cost spay-neuter veterinarians in the area, so we can always refer them to those kinds of things if finances is an issue. A lot of people have misconceptions about spaying or neutering the animal is going to change the animal's behavior, and so that is a reason that they don't want to do that. if it does make any changes to the behavior, it's going to be a change for the better in the animal. You know, a male cat is not going to want to roam and spray, and those are definitely behaviors that you don't necessarily want your cat anyway.
Absolutely not. So tell me a little bit about how you wound up working. This is a kind of job that you have to be a sort of a different person to be able to handle it, because
Yes.
I've been to the shelter, and just the barking alone, I mean, for me is very, very difficult. I can't imagine all day, every day, just with the constant barking. So how did you get into this? What made you decide to do this?
I actually just started at the shelter working part-time cleaning kennels when I was a student here at UCM. When I graduated, a position came open with the city to do animal control. So I spent a couple of years doing animal control out in the field. And after that time, the manager's position at the shelter opened, and I've been managing out there since 2010.
So let's talk about your days as animal control. What's that like? Tell me what an animal control officer's day is like.
Pretty much just driving around, looking for animals that maybe are misplaced. Our local animal control officer, he gets a lot of phone calls from individuals saying, you know, I've lost my dog, have you seen it in this area? So he knows to patrol in that area to look for a specific type of dog. Animal control is also very involved anytime there is an animal bite that would happen. The state has different policies as far as how those have to be handled and the reporting measures for those. Sometimes animal control's duties include animal cruelty or neglect, abuse type situations. So those investigations can be very lengthy in time as far as trying to track those and document everything.
So you did that for 2 years. What, as you recall, what's maybe one of the best outcomes or the best stories or something that happened that during the 2-year period that you did that you thought, wow, this is great, this is why I like doing this job?
I don't really remember one from my time, but our animal control officer that is working now, you know, on the shelter side of it, we're both kind of working together on this one. We recently had a call in which an individual went to put her dog outside, and she found a dog that had moved into a vacant doghouse on her property and had a litter of 10 puppies.
Oh my.
They weren't owned, you know, it was just a stray dog that just showed up and had puppies. So he went out there and he collected the puppies, collected the mom, brought them to the shelter, and we have been caring for them since they were about 3 days old, and we're getting real close to putting them up for adoption now.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's a lot of commitment on that person's part too, to take the time to get, and you know, with a stray dog especially, you don't know how that dog's going to react when you start messing with the puppies. So
absolutely,
that's pretty impressive.
Yep.
When you look at what you've done at the shelter, are there stories that you think about that you think are again good stories, good examples of like why you do what you do and how you're successful in doing it?
Every day. We, again, with our Facebook page, we have adopters continuously emailing us back and showing us pictures of an animal they adopted maybe 2 days ago, maybe it's an adoption they did 6 months ago. I think probably one of my favorite ones is a little dog that came to the shelter several years ago. She was so severely matted and had burrs and debris matted into her fur that we couldn't even tell what breed she was. She was microchipped, so we were able to track her microchip back to a breeder who told us that he bred schnauzers. We cleaned her up and found out that she was actually a puppy mill mom, and a lot of her behaviors were that of a puppy mill mom. She wasn't social, she had no attachment to anything. So I ended up taking her home and fostering her at my house for several months just to try to rehabilitate her before we transferred her to a rescue group in Minnesota, and we just got the 5-year update from her adoptive family that she walks 2 miles every day. As an 8-year-old dog now, she's hiking mountains with her family. So that was definitely one of my favorite stories.
Well, and that's like our dog is 11 now, 12 almost, and so she's and I have to admit I've never thought about updating the shelter on what's going on. So that's something for me to keep in mind. Well, if folks are watching this and they have an interest in seeing the animals at the shelter, obviously they can look you up on Facebook, but are they able to come visit you? Can they come by and just look?
We have open business hours Tuesday through Saturdays. We are closed on Sundays and Mondays. that people are welcome to come in and just browse the animals. We have a listing of all the animals that are available for adoption on not only our Facebook page, but we keep them listed with at least 16 other pet adoption type sites, such as petfinder.com and adoptapet.com. So if they just want to see what kind of animals we have at the shelter, they're welcome to go there. If they come in or call, we can talk to them a little bit about the history of the animal if it's known, and what kind of behaviors that we've seen in the animal to see if it's going to be the right match for that home.
Yeah, you never know, right? You have to have that personality of the dog and the personality of the owner probably need to mesh up pretty well. Fortunately, my dog at age 12 is pretty much just not doing anything and just laying around. So we're fine. That's kind of my personality too. So when you look at the shelter itself, are there opportunities for folks if they want to come and help you out, volunteer, donate, whatever, time, money, whatever it might be? Are there ways for folks to get involved at the shelter?
Absolutely. We have a volunteer application. Volunteers have to be 18 years old in order to volunteer at the shelter. And we have job opportunities for them to work on the shelter with us. Anything from helping clean, which is sometimes not the most pleasant thing to do at an animal shelter, to just spending some one-on-one time with the animals, because a lot of the animals at the shelter really need just someone who's going to sit and pet them. So we have those kinds of opportunities available for volunteers. As far as donations, we do take donations of just about anything you could think of, and some things that we use out there are not used for their typical means. We do have brochures at the shelter available telling what kinds of items that we need donated on a regular basis. Blankets, towels, cleaning supplies, newspapers. Those are some of the big ones that we go through on a regular basis.
I can imagine. So what is there a goal for you in terms of looking ahead in the next few years, something that you'd like to accomplish for the shelter, or a project that you're working towards that you really are?
We are always working to improve the shelter in multiple areas. We just built the existing shelter facility in 2005, and we're already on our way to outgrowing that. So we would like to eventually maybe add on to that building. We have a project starting within the next week in which we're going to be building an outdoor play area for some of the dogs, so that individuals who are looking at a dog or a volunteer who wants to spend some one-on-one time with a dog will have an actual area that they can go to where they're not distracted and they can actually spend some time with that animal. So there's always some kind of improvement that we're doing, and we're always coming up with new ideas that we can use to help the animals.
What would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about animals that they would pick up from a shelter, or something that, you know, people might think is true but really is not?
I would say that there's two. One, a lot of people think that shelters only have mutts. We only have mixed breeds. In reality, 25% of all animals that are in animal shelters are purebred animals. Another misconception that a lot of people have is that these animals are broken. There's something wrong with them, and that's why they have ended up at the animal shelter. A lot of these animals are at the shelter due to no fault of their own. They are animals that their families just aren't able to take care of them any longer, or some of them do have behavior issues, but we do work with those issues and try to correct those, and we explain those kinds of issues of an animal to an adopter so that they know what they're getting into when they adopt that animal.
I know with my current dog, we adopted her because she was a black dog, and then later found out she was a Belgian Malinois purebred, which is a French-German Shepherd, basically. So I was very surprised to find out that she was basically a purebred dog, and I would not have anticipated that.
Yep.
If you are watching now and you want to help, where can I go? How do I connect on Facebook? What's the phone number? How do I get in touch with the shelter?
On Facebook, it's just Warrensburg Animal Shelter. You can come out to the shelter. Our address is 37 Southwest 101 Road. We're out by the West Soccer Complexes. Or you can call the shelter at 660-747-7156, and we'll answer any questions we can for you.
And most days, plenty of dogs there, plenty of cats there. Any oddball animals there sometimes?
Always. During my time, we've had multiple wild animals. You know, it's not uncommon for us to see a guinea pig, a snake, a rabbit at the shelter, pretty much anything that needs our help, we're gonna help it in some way or another.
Sarah, I got to tell you, I would draw the line at the snakes. That's it. Somebody else is dealing with the snakes.
I did okay with the snakes. It was the Savannah monitor that I wasn't super fond of caring for when we had it there.
That's like a big iguana, right?
It's a very large, very dangerous lizard.
Yes. Someone else would handle that too.
We actually handled it, but it wasn't the most pleasant part of my job that week.
Have you ever sustained a bite from something like that?
Absolutely.
I would be surprised if that wasn't the case.
We are very careful about how we handle the animals, and we work a lot with identifying aggressive or fearful body language, so that we know when an animal's getting ready to strike, but they're still the ones they'll catch you off guard, and they'll still get you.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sarah Patton, she is with the Warrensburg Animal Shelter. As always, you can contact them directly. And if you missed all of that and all those web addresses and everything, you can just check our website, kmos.org. We'll have information there for you to help you get in touch with Sarah. In the meantime, we thank you for watching here on Pause. I'm your host, Dr. Phil Hoffman. We'll see you back here again next week on Pause.